This week on our Water Cooler Wednesday, we have Stacey Ferris here. She's a CPA and a forensic accountant, and she's also an adjunct professor at Maryland. Remind me where you teach. It's at University of Maryland, right?
Yeah, University of Maryland, the Smith School of Business.
Great, awesome. She is going to be presenting her digital asset hierarchy today and her draft for the article she's going to be writing for the Journal of Accountancy. Welcome, Stacey. I'll have you give a little bit of a background on yourself, and then we can jump into the discussion.
Great. So yeah, like you said, I'm currently an associate director with HKA, where I'm a forensic accountant working on a variety of projects, typical forensic accounting type stuff. I have 10 years of experience, started at Ernst & Young, forensic accounting the whole way, litigation, oddball jobs. I always say, you throw me into the chaos and I make sense of the chaos. And so that's why probably I ended up coming up with this crypto asset hierarchy. This evolved out of, I started working as a professor, adjunct professor at the Smith School, and they initially asked me to teach something around like IT audit and blockchain. They just wanted a course for accounting students that would cover what blockchain was. And in the course of developing that, I was trying to talk about and speak to, excuse me, internal controls for crypto, right? And how should you structure internal controls and risk assessment? And I kept encountering this situation where it was like, well, that works for this type of asset, but then you've got this kind of token, or you got this coin over here, and it's completely different. And so all of the needs for it are different. And I found that quite frustrating because I was like, well, there's so many different types. And then I would go and try and figure out, well, what are the types? Well, so can someone just like give me a list? This is the types of crypto assets out there. And there wasn't a list, I would find like the 17 types of NFTs, and so I started basically trying to like make sense of it all. At one point, you just wrote it all down, like all the different types I would find. And I started kind of like try to group them together. Okay, so well, these are kind of similar. These are kind of similar. And initially, I basically just developed this crypto asset hierarchy. The first version of this, the first iteration actually is, you can find it linked through my LinkedIn, but it's something I put out on medium.com. Very early version, and I put that out like almost a year ago, February 2022, I want to say, and I published it. It's really a simple one. You can see the evolution of this hierarchy. It started with just basically being cryptocurrency and NFTs, and I was like, I know that those are two very distinct types of assets, and so I'll go ahead and share my screen. It is disabled, so if you're able to look at your screen,
I just unlocked it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that has all evolved into this hierarchy here. And so this hierarchy is based on essentially a year of just having conversations with people. The NFT portion was published in October 2022 in an article, Journal of Accountancy, What CPAs Need to Know About NFTs. I wanted to call it Brave New Metaverse. I did not win that fight. And this is like basically it was vetted by the digital asset working group. Surprisingly, they argued with us up and down over whether I could explain hashes to people. You can't, I could not put hash in an article. They told me that was too complicated. But they didn't have any issues with this part of this hierarchy or the types. In fact, it was very popular and they liked it a lot. It was kind of like, well, thanks, somebody's actually come up with a reasonable list of things, right? Mm-hmm. And so then basically started to then attack the fungible crypto assets side. This originally was called digital assets and fungible and digital assets on this side and cryptocurrency, but I've changed the terms a little bit as that's evolved in the accounting community. As I talked to more people and kind of realized, oh, well, like for instance, virtual currency is a term really only used in a tax setting. And with the government and government enforcement, they'll say virtual currency. Cryptocurrency is just kind of generally not accepted in any kind of formal financial reports. You stay away from that term generally. So yeah, we worked into these types here. And this side of the hierarchy on the fungible crypto assets, that's what is really new to the AICPA and the digital asset working group. the most developed piece of this is the virtual digital currency arm, and within that you have fully decentralized, which is predominantly just Bitcoin. There's very few coins that would probably meet this at this point. I think that as some other coins mature and their developers step back and are less involved, there's definitely a threshold that needs to be determined, like what's the threshold when something passes from, say, being a private issuer digital currency to a fully decentralized one. So that's, there's things about this hierarchy that like will still require refinement, and rules about how to apply it that requires some refinement. Within private issuer, there's utility tokens, digital currencies, stable coins. This being like three distinct types that you find, like stable coins treated very differently from, like a tether is very different from Doge. And the way you might want to treat, the way you're going to do your risk assessment, legal considerations for it might be different, and so forth. Utility tokens, this is getting at like the governance tokens, DAO tokens, anything that's really designed to be used on a specific platform for a specific purpose. It might be traded on markets, but people trade it for the purpose of then going back to that platform or that app and using it there. Like that's really the predominant purpose of it.
And the driver of value, right? So that's what gives those value is the utility that you're saying.
Yes, that's what really drives a lot of the value, right? And so what I go through in the article is kind of my methodology for putting this together, and I really like to use the example of land, and as just or like PP&E is another type of asset you can consider, and that just explains how I approach this. You come at it from a perspective of you need to keep it high level enough that it's useful and it will last for a really long time and be applicable, and yet detailed enough that important categories and distinctions are defined in there. So for instance, with land, people will come to me all the time and challenge, like this thing has gone through so many different challenges. That's part of why I have, a lot of confidence in it at this point. For instance, the DAO token concept, or securities and commodities, people say, well, what about this coin? It doesn't really fall into here, or I think you need to have an extra category for, this or that. And it's kind of like you talk through and you say, all right, but does it really, like in essence, does it belong in another, like one of the existing categories, right? So
I challenged you on the utility versus like adding a governance component in there, like under the private issuer. But really, to your point, when you look at it, I mean, is there really a distinct difference in how you would treat it from a risk perspective or an accounting perspective versus a utility token, like a more traditional utility token, when you're looking at governance versus DAO and all that stuff. So, I mean, you made a really good point that like, yeah, you could expand on it, but ultimately it fits into that same mold of a utility token. So why kind of mesh it all? Why kind of make it more elaborate than it needs to be?
Exactly. And actually, you're not the first person to bring up governance tokens and DAO tokens. And so, I mean, like, could this hierarchy change? Yes, it will change. It's going to, like, as we get more defined on securities and commodities, there may be subtypes here. I've talked to some people about CBDCs, and they will say that, for instance, that you have a retail CBDC and you have commercial CBDC as your two primary types. But I have decided to leave this undefined because these two categories right here, the subtypes, really highly depend on what happens with regulation and legislation and development there, until we get to a point where it's like this has actually been addressed and we have working prototypes, and like we have legislation or we have regulation or we have like very clear guidance from the SEC of this is what meets a security definition. I wanted to keep that open for the time being, but yeah, the DAO token is something that's come up quite a few times. I've had people ask me, there's some coins out there that are called NFT tokens. Very confusing because they are not NFTs. And most of those NFT tokens are actually securities or they're utility tokens. No. One of the other interesting aspects of this hierarchy is that I put authentication NFTs up here. This was originally one of the real challenges about writing about NFTs for the AICPA, was that there's a lot of examples and use cases for NFTs and blockchain, where you create a hash ID for some specific item, or you tokenize something, right? But the token itself is never really attached to the sale or the transaction. It's just used to track something through a system. So I think I want to say it was either Brian, it might have been you, but someone asked me about supply chain NFTs. And yes, supply chain NFTs is what falls into authentication NFT, or any kind of application where you're using the concept of being able to create an NFT. Essentially, if you were taking a hash and storing it on a blockchain to represent something that isn't currency, but you're not,
or an asset,
asset, yeah, but you're not, or like data, or like a document, but you're not actually selling that hash or that bit of or you're not using that to identify the owner of it. That's an authentication NFT. I mean, the easy distinction here is like, if you're going to make an NFT to sell it on a market, it's an ownership NFT.
Right. And so would something like, because this is a newer concept, like soulbound NFTs, where you can't transfer them out of the wallet once you receive them. Like an example of them would be, a degree that you receive as an NFT. Obviously the university wouldn't want you to be able to transfer that to someone else to prove that they have a degree because they didn't earn it. So soulbound NFTs are designed to not be able to be moved once they've been sent to a wallet. So do you think that would kind of fall under the same classification as an authentication?
Vast majority of them are absolutely authentication NFTs. They're just designed. I mean, you're using the whole concept of blockchain and hashes, but you're not trying to sell it.
Right.
So
and you wouldn't include that on a balance sheet because it doesn't have any value. Right. It has the value of that you earned the education, but it doesn't have any tangible value in the real world.
Yes.
You can't really sell it. Yeah.
There are other NFTs that are metals. At this point, I was kind of putting it into single use, is these types of NFTs that minted.com is an example of a company that basically they do little badges for the way you used to have trophies or ribbons or something like participation ribbons. Now you can get an NFT badge, or something like that. And they sell those. I was kind of thinking of those as single use NFTs. Single use is also a category where you could put an NFT that you spend money on. It is on market, but it doesn't really have a lot of use beyond a year.
Right.
So the distinction between an authentication and single use is really a single use is something you're going to find on a marketplace to buy. Once you buy
it, it may not be rare, so it may not be necessarily valuable to someone else, but you need it maybe for that in game. I also was thinking of single use as kind of like a POAP token, like a proof of attendance protocol, where
tickets.
Yes. Okay. Cool. Yeah, because it did have value at one point, but then it expires after a certain amount of time, and it could have some sentimental value. I think you describe it in the article as having sentimental value, but not necessarily any lasting value beyond the event itself.
I read something about in China using I think blockchain technology to track chickens where they originated from, like chicken that you consume for dinner at the end of the night, and they were able to basically determine a source of bad chicken that was causing sickness and disease in people using. So that would be like a single use thing, right? It's just for that one chicken.
That would be I think that ends up being an authentication NFT,
like the supply chain, right?
Yeah, reason being that you don't use the NFT to make the sale to your end customer.
Okay.
Yeah, it tracks it throughout the supply chain, just like the supply chain NFTs. Like VeChain is a good example of a company that uses that.
A little
track things
startup
along?
that I've worked with a little bit. It's called Eve Livestock, and they're using blockchain and basically NFTs to tokenize cattle in Africa. For the purpose of tracking it, they're doing authentication NFTs
Okay.
under this hierarchy. Anything that transforms itself, like let's say it's a ticket that becomes a collectible after the show, that's actually a reusable NFT.
Okay.
Particularly if it transforms into a collectible that you then expect to sell again. Now, and that's why you have to like take each one of these things and kind of look at it like, what is the substance of this? And consider that.
Well, when I was at TrustSwap, we had they started a NFT marketplace, and one of the first things we auctioned off was a NFT picture of a signed, I think it was like whenever the South Africa World Cup was, it was I think it was 2016 or 2018 or something like that. It was signed by all the team, and then if you burned the NFT, you could get the physical painting that was actually signed. So would that kind of be a perpetual, or would that fall into reusable, would you say? Because it still represented a real world asset, but you could destroy the NFT in order to get the art.
So, sounds like single use, because once you use it, it's gone.
But it still represents a real asset, or maybe you got both. Can't remember whether you got both or
if you like redeem it and then it still shows up in your wallet as an NFT that you own, but it's attached to like a real physical item, it potentially is a real asset. It might be a reusable, because reusables could be attached to real artwork. Like for instance, what's his name? Beeple, what he does, like all of his NFTs are attached to, a lot of them are attached to a physical piece of art, right?
Very cool. And it's so complex. I'm so glad you have this outline, because it's so needed. And it's like, you kind of, even if you're in this space, you understand these things maybe to a degree, but then having them boxed into categories is really, I mean, we're accountants, right? So we have to put things in boxes like you say all the time. And I think it's important to do this exercise as well.
And the tax treatment is going to correspond to boxes more likely than not. You're going to have to pick the box that goes with the tax treatment, you know?
I think that having this hierarchy, I've gotten so much positive feedback. People are like, oh my God, this simplifies things. I've had lawyers go like, oh my God, this really simplifies things. Like, it makes it easier for me to say, oh, okay, great. So if something falls into this category, I'm going to worry about securities law for you. But if it's over here, as you know, now here's something to consider. The NFTs are over here, and I don't have a separate category for securities, but a lot of NFTs will qualify as securities. Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of them, particularly in the reusable category. So that's one caveat, you know, and figuring out how to show that visually. Haven't figured out how to show that it could be that at some point securities commodities ends up being maybe like, you know, a shadow box that, you know, we put certain things in, or just note that like anything in this whole hierarchy could be a security if it meets the Howey test.
Right. So would an example be like, so Bored Ape Yacht Club, those NFTs before, let's assume it's before they've gained their popularity or whatever, and then they launch their second project, which is Mutant Ape Yacht Club. I would consider those almost a security now, because presumably people are investing in it because they hope to make a profit on it, and they are maybe not relying on. I think the thing that the distinguishing factor is, like, in the Howey test, they talk about employees and workers direct. What's the term?
I know what you're thinking about. It's promoter, AP, active participant or something.
Yeah. Because I wrote a whole article on this. It was a while ago, so I can't remember.
Well, I just taught it a few weeks ago, and I tested people on it, so I ought to know it.
Yeah, so it's a common enterprise.
Yeah, common enterprise. Yeah.
Yes. So, you know, so would you consider like Mutant Ape Yacht Club a security from that standpoint? Because
That's a good question. We did this little exercise in class where I gave them a bunch of different tokens and coins and said, all right, do you think it's a security or not? And then in the groups, then they came up to the board and they marked whether it was or not. And for every single item that I gave them, everyone was split right down the middle about whether it was a security or not. So I think there is a good case that Bored Ape Yacht Club and all these different collections, especially where they're heavily promoted or they pay promoters.
Yeah.
I think there's a strong argument that that is a security. However, what's the common enterprise piece?
Right. Well, that was my argument in, I wrote a 2-part article on, when Gary came out and said that ETH was a security, now that was proof of stake, I thought it failed 2 of the 4 tests for the Howey test. And one of them was common enterprise because, yeah, of course, ETH probably was a security at launch, but now, I mean, yes, of course, Vitalik is heavily active in the ETH community, but what is the common enterprise? How do you identify that common enterprise? And I mean, if you're saying that like developers that are working independently as groups are a common enterprise, I mean, that's a bit of a stretch to me. But with Yuga Labs and Bored Ape Yacht Club, there seems to be closer to that there on the spectrum of kind of common enterprise versus not, in my mind, versus ETH now. So yeah, anyways, I'll send you that article after this and I'd love to get your input on it.
There was the Coinbase CEO put out an article about like the path forward, and part of it he gives his 4 what he thinks the 4 distinctions for security should be. I actually really like how he approached it. I
saw that came out like the last couple of days, right?
Yeah, it's really new. It's going to take some time for people to digest that, but he has some good ideas about it. And I think part of like what he's talking about in terms of regulation becomes a lot simpler once you can say, oh, these are my types of assets. Cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Part of the difficulty that people have with it is, they try to make definitions of things and they'll make a definition that fits like this group. And then somebody pops up and says, well, what about these supply chain NFTs? They're not like any of that other stuff. And, that's when you get into these ridiculous arguments, circular arguments where nobody can agree on the definition of things. So, yeah, I'm hoping this will be a good contribution towards, moving things forward and kind of demystifying the whole space to people, making it simpler for people to learn and to make sense of things. Yeah,
I think that in your article you do a good job of tying it to real world assets, which I think is what you have to do for any of these things in order to make them, like you say, demystify them, because ultimately they resemble traditional TradFi assets, at least to some degree. And so when we look at treatment for those and well-established treatment for those, it makes it easier once you've boxed them up with characteristics and things. Totally agree.
One of the interesting things with NFTs is that I ended up treating them based on time period of holding and also like lifetime. So considering the time of use if you look at how GAP approaches treating assets, it looks for major differences in the type, right? Like for instance, inventory, very different from land. And then it looks at time periods that you hold things like short-term, long-term. Those are the 2 kind of axes that we grade and judge and separate assets up.
Yeah. I'm just trying to, I just pulled up, Brandon did a good job of posting the Brian Armstrong article. I was just pulling that up so I have it for later. Yes, I think that I had a couple more notes. I read through your article and I had bring up something. Oh, it was the soulbound NFT things. I think that's I mean, I don't think you need to define it like a separate thing, but I think that was cool to hear your thoughts on that as well, because I think that's a kind of unique use case as well. I think someone else had something to add.
I was just looking at the image itself, and I think that, Stacey, if you switch the securities and commodities with the virtual digital currency, then you can make maybe a dotted box around securities and commodities and tie it to the things on the non-fungible token side that could be either, or just use, like dotted lines, and that would probably make perfect sense.
That's not a bad idea. Ironically, I used to have the virtual digital currency and securities commodities. They used to be flopped. They used to be in the same.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out how to organize this thing in a way that's visually appealing and compact has been my biggest challenge. I will tell you, I've spent a lot of time like adjusting the size of boxes and scooching them around and attaching arrows.
Well, you got to figure once you give it to the Journal of Accountancy, they're gonna go make their own graphic too.
Generally speaking, they do. Actually, a lot of the graphics that I've given them, the only thing they change is the font and the color.
Okay.
I did have one colorblind person tell me they couldn't see that these all used to be green boxes. They told me they couldn't tell the difference in any of the colors. So that's why we now have the blue and yellow.
I think Tom had something he wanted to jump in with.
I was just going to say, Stacey, this is brilliant, and it's really clearly laid out. And in my mind, I'm more on the NFT side and just looking through, and I've been thinking about that for weeks and months, really. And actually, that's exactly how I imagine it in my head. And I've been trying to, while you've been here explaining it, just putting my accounting hat on and going, right, critique it, find the flaw. But actually, you're dead right. By zooming out slightly and just categorizing these, by single use, reusable, real asset, etc. I think that's like step one. That's iteration one. I mean, you could go to town with this. You could create 50, 100 different, for every different NFT contract, you could create a different classification. And that's where my head was at. I was kind of thinking if I could somehow brainstorm that, but it just becomes chaos very, very quickly.
Yes, yes.
It may have to get there at some point, but for now, this makes clear, concise sense.
I think that there's a lot of subtypes in each group.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that we need to put the subtypes in the hierarchy, right? As long as the subtypes ultimately have fundamentally the same treatment accounting wise, that's where I go back to the example of land, for instance, like, beachfront property and swampland are both land, but what I do with them, the amount of money I spend on them, how I develop them, very different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And their needs are very different. But in accounting records, you just have like lands, beachfront, land, this beach, land, Okefenokee swamp, and it's just listed there at the cost, right? And that's it.
Yeah.
And your subledger might have like expenses related to the improvements you've done on that land, or like taxes or something that you pay. Yeah. But it tells you absolutely nothing about the substance of that land and what's going on with it. And so I thought, well, we can do the same thing with digital assets, right? I mean, how am I going to account for it, right? Now, FASB is going to give us a standard around fungible crypto assets. This is another, by the way, thank you, Tom. I really appreciate that. It's good to hear that from people. And I'm glad that it serves its purpose. I wanted to jump onto another topic real quick.
Yeah. Regarding
the FASB. The FASB has said that they're going to address fungible crypto assets, meaning this right here. I wish I could take credit for that. I mean, I might have sent an email to the entire team being like, hey, not that you're really interested, but I do have a hierarchy and here's the differences. I never heard back from anybody. Fair enough. I understand. I'm just a, uppity CPA sitting out here. They're going to give us a standard for fungible crypto assets, right? And they've already said they're going to make that fair market value, mark to market. which I think makes a lot of sense. It was driving me absolutely insane that you can impair large quantities of Bitcoin. I mean, I understand that from a risk perspective, it being allowed, I get it. But it also is just wild the way it drives like these huge net losses and deferred tax assets and everything. And the end game of all of that is just really unclear at this point. They're not giving us a standard for NFTs. So what does that mean? I don't think that it is a problem that we don't have a standard, because NFTs are all tied to an underlying asset. And all of the different types of assets you can come up with that these are tied to, we already have accounting standards for. So you don't have to have a separate accounting standard for it. Now think it through and tell me if you come up with something where you're like, well, actually, we don't have anything that addresses it. But as far as I can tell, a single use just becomes an expense. A reusable is like art. It's like an inventory or a long-term asset or something like that. A perpetual is kind of like it's kind of like land in a way, but it's like digital land, or however you would normally record. Oh, it would be an intangible asset. It would be an indefinite lived intangible asset. So for instance, a domain name, Decentraland property, it's an indefinite lived intangible asset, largely not going to lose value. That makes sense to impair that. Does not make sense to impair Bitcoin, makes sense to impair perpetual NFT. Real asset refers to when you're tokenizing, you want to be able to like have 10 people or 100 people own a painting, or what was it, the
or a high rise.
Yeah, or a high rise, you know, to rent it out. And with what's particularly important to pay attention to is with the real assets is, does the token represent ownership of the asset, in which case it's a real asset NFT, or does it represent use rights? If the token just gives you the right to use it, but you don't own the asset, then it may be actually a utility token, or potentially even fall over here into some kind of security.
So like, all right, for the example, Flyfish Club is a restaurant in New York City that they're opening where you have to hold the NFT in order to make a reservation. Would you consider that a utility token, even though it's an NFT and there's a limited number of the NFTs, but a whole subsection of them don't have any different artwork, it's just different numbered? I would almost consider that kind of like a utility token now that you say that, because it grants you access to something, but they do have some differences in the artwork, but really they're two batches of things. And I know you'd probably need more detail on it, but that almost sounds like a utility.
What are you buying the token with?
You buy it on OpenSea or something like that. So like ETH or
okay,
USDC or whatever.
So it really is like an NFT.
Yeah.
And it's
but
like
you wouldn't buy it. There's no artistic quality to it whatsoever. So you wouldn't buy it. It's a unique.
But it does still grant you access to something.
But the access is not differentiated between the access from another one either. So I would think it's
that's true. But also it's not single use, because it's like, as long as you hold that, you can make reservations. You don't have to buy it each time.
I see. Okay. Interesting.
So this is like a membership token.
Yeah, it's a membership to a.
It's like club access, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Like a country club would have club access kind of thing. But it is kind of fungible because, you know, there's two subcategories. There's one where you can get access to the omakase room there, but you would get the omakase experience. But then there's another whole subset that's just the restaurant as a whole. And the artwork doesn't really differentiate at all. So they are kind of fungible within their own subtypes.
Yeah, so you're talking a club. You're talking a club, and then VIP in the club. It's kind of
right. Exactly. Yeah.
It's got to be utility.
They call it an NFT, but now thinking about it, it could almost be a utility token. Yeah, I agree.
Is it? So it's like one token gives you access. So, it may be a reusable NFT.
Yeah. Okay. Those are the two I was kind of debating since this call. I had always thought of it as an NFT because I really hadn't questioned it, but Yeah, that's interesting. Go ahead, Tom.
Utility token here is getting at, for instance, somebody who challenged this previously, they said the most bizarre thing to me on this call once. They said, well, what if I put an NFT on a plane? And it took about a half hour to figure out what they meant by putting an NFT on a plane. It's like, what? So what they meant is they were taking a plane and selling NFT tokens, and you could buy the NFT tokens, and then you could redeem them to like reserve and buy flights on that private jet.
Okay.
So with the Fly Fish Club ones, you can actually lend them or lease them, right? Taylor could let me use his. He can send it to my wallet. Is that how it works? And then
no, there would be a smart contract where you would lease it from me for a month or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a reusable NFT.
Yeah. Okay.
I really think that's a reusable NFT.
I was just going to propose something. I think I've read about this. I'm trying to find the example online, but is it possible for a NFT to be, or is it possible for a token to be fungible and non-fungible at the same time?
Well, she does have an example of that, semi-fungible tokens in the article. Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if it's possible for tokens to have two, fit within two or more categories here.
It's possible, and I think that would be a difficult situation where you got to figure out how you're going to allocate valuation. What is the part of the asset that's like expiring in value, and then what's the part of it that's reusable? So that would be kind of a little bit on the complex side. It could be in multiple categories. Now, for instance, the example given to me or what I was challenged with was, what about Magic the Gathering trading cards online, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Magic the Gathering, I don't know if you guys are true nerds.
I'm aware of it.
And you've played in person.
I mentioned
I haven't played in person, but I'm aware of it.
I mentioned that I was in the nuclear Navy. These guys I never played it once, but they would play for 24 hours straight with Mountain Dew and
Okay, well, I'm gonna like claim my nerd badge. I used to own about 1,000 cards and played it. It's really awkward to be like a 30-year-old woman and walk into like a Magic the MTG gathering, and it's like, oh my god, this place smells like teen spirit. I understand what Nirvana is. So anyway, I was kind of like, I think unless I can find a group of adults, this is really maybe not my age category, but it was fun. It's a fun game. I actually quite enjoy it. I also like D&D, so that's me. Magic the Gathering cards, right? Most of them are, here's the way that MTG works. They issue new cards like once or twice a year. I think about twice a year. It's like every 4 to 6 months, they make a new issue of new cards. And they'll issue, new collections with new collectible cards. Some of them are like, the superheroes, planeswalkers cards, which are very special. Some of them are a little like they're sparkly, they glitter a little bit, or they have a gold banner or something like that. They look cooler than the regular cards, right? And the vast majority of these you're going to play with them when they first come out. You kind of get to know them. It's really cool. You play with them for a year. And then beyond that, you can't use them with new collections. And also they've set it up so that they have like tournaments, and to play in the tournament, you have to have like the current year deck or the current or the prior year deck. And you can't use decks that are older than that, right? There are some cards, though, that are considered extremely, extremely valuable particularly for non-tournament playing. There's something called a Black Lotus, which has sold for upwards of $25,000, which is kind of insane when you really think about it. It's like a card.
Yeah.
A game.
Yeah.
To spend that much is a little insane, but it's a collectible, right? It's an extremely valuable collectible, right? And so the idea was, well, they're semi-fungible because there's a lot of them. Like when they issue a new batch of the digital MTG cards, right? Vast majority of them are identical. Even the really valuable ones are going to have multiple copies of each other, right? And so what is that? Is it a token? Is it single use? Is it reusable? Is it just authentication? And my answer to it at this point is, and again, you got to look at each of these use cases. You really end up having to look at it and kind of going like, well, what's the substance of this transaction? For this particular one, semi-fungible, it's like the ones that you kind of use and then discard that aren't particularly special. Those are really like single-use NFTs. It's a gaming artifact that you buy so you can use it for a year, maybe two, but really a year. And then you might resell it on a secondary market, potentially. But the resale values of these, of like the most of the cards is like 3 cents, it's in the pennies. You're not getting a lot for that. So I don't even know if it's enough to qualify as like a reusable NFT or to go to the trouble of calling it a reusable. It's a single use, and you could almost say like it's like a disposal rebate in a way when you get rid of it. But then there's some cards that become collectibles, right? You keep them for years. They're going to gain in value over time. You'll resell them. People are going to pay more for them, particularly if you can find a particularly rare one. And I think that's going to become more evident over time as, more time goes on and you have the digital collections. And those are obviously reusable NFTs. So that's an instance, Tom, to speak to your point of like, can you have an NFT that falls into 2 or more categories where, yeah, like in a collection or in a platform or a single type of NFT, you could have multiple types of things that represent different types of value, and you would account for them differently.
Yeah, I almost feel like this hierarchy needs like a test, and maybe after a year, you test it every year, and you say actually, the NFT has changed. It's become a security. Bored Ape Yacht Club now actually, it's so valuable. It's actually traded as security. Okay, fine, we'll move it over. I mean, the test would be incredibly complex, even with just the categories we have here. But if there was some sort of, you touched on substance testing there, something like that could help define what category it actually sits in, or maybe different parts of the assets sit in different parts. I need to find out. There is an NFT standard contract that's been released where part of it is non-fungible and part of it is fungible. So there are, it does get quite complex quite quickly.
Yeah, it really does. I think that for the most part, this is going to meet the needs of the community. I agree with you that there definitely needs to be like within an organization, if you have NFTs, you need to make a test probably on an annual basis to say like, is this still, does this still fall, do we still have these categorized correctly? As we move into a future where people are getting audits and the audit includes testing collections of NFTs, audit tests need to include, and that's my background really, is complex audits, forensic audits and all. Audits need to include steps where you make a sample of different NFTs and you look at the substance of that NFT and say, is this correctly categorized? Have they accounted for it appropriately?
Maybe you
So
come up with
one thing I wanted
scoring system next, where you're, things that can be in multiple places, you're kind of scoring them on what puts them into which bucket.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to ask you, based on the article, is just a clarification, because I didn't understand what you meant here. You were saying that there's no reason to present at present to assume that use of NFTs need to be disclosed in financial statements. What did you mean by that?
So I'm talking specifically about authentication NFTs.
Oh, okay, and that's okay, yeah.
And even for a lot of the ownership ones, like if you have a real asset, and or like a perpetual, right? I mean, all of this is going to get rolled up and presented just as crypto assets, and it might even get divided into like the 2 main categories and say a no disclosure that says, well, here's our fungible crypto assets and our NFTs are worth this value. You know, or you might produce do them in large groups, but I don't think that you have to necessarily get into detail in your financial statements or in your note disclosures about like, well, we have, you know, a fractional, like we have, you know, fractional ownership of 15 paintings where we own this much percentage and we do that using an NFT.
Okay. And just because it's not, I mean, maybe potentially if it's a significant enough amount of your portfolio or your company's portfolio, but or not even, because it's just representative ownership of something where there's not really, because my only thought of the need for a disclosure there would be just the inherent risk of, you know, but it could be wrapped into the risk of like a security risk of your wallet getting hacked or something like that. You know, that would be the only thing that I could think about. But yeah, anyways, I just wanted just to talk about that from because I was confused a little bit, but it makes sense now.
I think it's particularly like, for instance, a perpetual NFT is going to be shown on your financial statements as an indefinite lived intangible asset, or just intangible assets, really. Because a lot of these things will end up showing up like single use will be expenses, most of them. Reusables are the one category where you're probably always going to disclose, hey, these are actually NFTs. With a perpetual, you're talking about intangible assets.
Right.
It's probably going on the balance sheet as an intangible. Do you have to say and disclose to the public that we own this using an NFT and using a wallet?
Right.
Maybe,
Not
maybe
really.
not. I'm not sure I see a justification for having to disclose that publicly. Real asset, where you're just tokenizing things or just, you know, using an NFT in a wallet in order to transfer ownership, like the tokenized homes.
Right.
I don't know that you need to disclose like the method by which you own the home is a wallet.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
That's
Cool.
what I was getting at there.
No, that makes total sense.
So maybe that needs a little more clarification. So, all right, well, we're getting close to the end of the hour. Is there other things that you want to talk through, or?
No, I mean, for me, it's really great to have it laid out. And I know I've said it already in the call, but yeah, thank you so much for presenting this here. I'm glad that we were able to weigh in a little bit and kind of maybe help you continue to build that confidence in the model, because it is really great. So I'm happy that you brought it to the community, and I'm excited for more of these types of discussions, because I mean, I know you said you got your nerd badge with Magic Gathering, but I think you already had it, just like us. So I think we all arrived with our nerd badges. So and I mean that in the best way possible. Yeah, no, I love nerding out on this stuff. It's really interesting, and thank you again for presenting that here.
Well, thank you
Stacey,
for.
Sorry, I was just going to echo that as well, Stacey. This is brilliant. Thanks for sharing it. And if you want us to get involved in any more of this, please let me know, because yeah, we all have the geek badge, so I'm more than happy to read over it. It's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. I appreciate you you all like providing a platform and being receptive to this and all. The hard part begins now, where I send it over to the Journal of Accountancy and it starts going through their multiple reviews, and it really is a rigorous review process.
I think you're prepared. You've gone through the fire with us.
Say what?
I think you're prepared for it, though. You've gone through the fire with us, and it sounds like a lot of other colleagues as well. So
it still doesn't compare to what AICPA put you through. So the NFT article, we submitted it in April, and it took us 4 months till August to get to a draft they liked. So that's why I say, you know, I start this whole article off by saying, whenever someone tells me to think outside the box, I reliably quip, but I'm an accountant. I put things in boxes for a living. I think that's hilarious.
Yeah.
It probably is not going to survive.
Yeah, they'll probably take that part out, because it's not like straight to the meat of the article, you know, like everything in the Journal of Accountancy is really stiff. It's like super focused.
Yeah, cut and dry. They take out the humor,
Yeah,
don't make
it's,
jokes and
it's,
things.
it's like a tech. It's a tech manual. There's no personality in any of their articles. It's a tech manual.
I still have to like give them drafts with a little
Yeah.
bit of personality.
You got to try. You got to try.
Try. Oh my goodness.
Well,
All right. Well, thank you
yeah,
so much.
that's everything we have.
If you have other thoughts or ideas that pop into your mind, Tom, as you get digging into all those weird NFTs and smart contracts, absolutely, feel free to reach out and open the conversation on stuff you're encountering. It's a fascinating area.
100%. Thanks.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you, everybody. That wraps up our Water Cooler Wednesday. This will be available hopefully tomorrow for rewatch. So if you want to, we'll hopefully get other people in the community to watch this because I think it's huge value. So last time, thanks again, Stacey, and have a great night, everyone.